daughter's birthday. So my family's having dinner right now. Yeah.
That's
my
okay.
parents are here having dinner together. So I sat down with them. I started dinner. I didn't eat anything except I was picking up fries. So I'm very thirsty. I don't like eating for the meetings too much. You know, all the snacks. I was like, yes, she is. 14 years there, just leave. It's bedtime.
Okay, everybody being here, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the October meeting of the Union Township Planning Commission. We had Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call, please.
Buckley.
Here.
Clerk Cody.
Here.
Darren.
Here.
Fuller is here. LaBelle.
Here.
Milky.
Here.
Shingles.
Here.
Squattrito.
Here.
Webster.
Here.
All present.
Okay, thank you. So we last met on September 18th, and you have minutes from the September meeting. Are there any corrections to the September minutes?
On page 3, under B, the third paragraph, unless I'm reading this wrong, there is, in the last sentence, a copy of be submitted to the township and without, is that what they're saying? Is they're saying, this just doesn't read right to me. I looked at that. I'm like, is it without any relief of sidewalks? So I'm not sure if that first with is really needed, but, so, that was my only thing that I saw grammatically. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I don't think that Take first out with with. is needed.
I think it should probably read submitted to the township without any, so
Yeah.
remove and with.
Yes.
Or else just omit that and before without. I mean, the whole point was that the plans will not have relief from sidewalks.
Correct. I was just looking at more as a grammatically saying that it was
Yeah,
submitted without.
yeah.
So,
If you're taking the and out of that one, you might want to take it out of paragraph 6, last sentence too.
yes.
Just to be consistent.
Which one?
It's the
Oh,
last,
okay.
last motion.
I was actually looking at 6, so it's actually in both paragraphs where a motion was made.
Yes,
Yes.
3 and
Okay.
6.
That's correct.
Oh, I see where there's an and with. I was not
Yes.
looking at the right paragraph.
Right.
So the suggestion is in paragraph 3 in the last sentence to remove and with immediately before without. And in the 6th paragraph to remove and immediately before without.
Yep.
You see that? Okay. Anything else? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Motion is by Webster. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by LaBelle. Further discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes with those slight wording changes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We sound like a real crowd tonight. All 9 of us are here. Okay, correspondence / board reports. I assume if we have correspondence regarding the agenda items, we'll deal with those as they come. Any other correspondence that's not related to agenda items? Nope. Reports. Board of Trustees?
Okay. On the 9/24 meeting, I don't know if you can hear me, we approved the rezoning of
2018-05 from the AG to the R2A, located on the Remus Road that we recommended to the Board of Trustees.
Okay.
And then we voted to revoke the sidewalk waivers that were recommended to be revoked by the Sidewalk and Pathways Committee. The 7 that were located on the designated priority streets in accordance with the sidewalk relief policy.
Very good. Any questions for our representative from the Board of Trustees?
I'm not sure what you mean by revoke. I'm a little unclear about what was decided.
The waivers,
Right.
they're no longer waivers. We revoked them.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, I misunderstood that. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? ZBA?
I actually missed the last one. Came down with whatever the crud is that's going around. So Peter, I don't know. Was there anything exciting that happened there?
The only thing we did was approve minutes from we approved minutes from a previous ZBA meeting, which would have been it's October, so we approved minutes from a special ZBA meeting in September. And that was it.
Okay, sounds memorable. Let's see. Sidewalks and pathways?
Nothing to report. Our next meeting is October 30th.
Okay. Any other reports that people have? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. So we have an agenda. It has 4 action items on it. The special use permit carried over from last month, and then 2 rezoning requests with public hearings, and then possible appointment to the Sidewalks and Pathways Committee. Is there anything else that needs to be on tonight's agenda, or any issues with tonight's agenda? If not, a motion to approve the agenda is in order.
So moved.
Motion is by Shingles.
Second.
I'll take, was it Webster?
That
Was it
one.
Cody?
Yeah.
I'll take Cody as the second. So motion was by Shingles, second by Cody to approve the agenda as prepared. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we have our agenda. So at this point, we always have public comment before we get to our agenda items. This public comment is for individuals who would like to address the Planning Commission on any item that's not on tonight's agenda. If anyone is here to speak to the rezoning requests or the public hearing items, they'll be invited to speak at that time. But if anybody would like to address the commission on any item that's not on tonight's agenda, they're invited to do so at this time. We just ask that you give us your name and address for the minutes, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. So public comment is open at 7:07.
Hello, everyone.
Hello?
My name is Marty Fig, and my address is 810 Ashland Drive. And don't want to use a lot of time, but I hope you won't take 3 minutes. I just want to talk about my impression on going to some meetings, talking about the future use map, the zoning map, and the master plan. And a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of meetings, a lot of discussion, a lot of ideas processed. And it's an ongoing process. It hardly stops when it starts again. Been watching it for quite a few years go on. And going back to some of the original master plans that were even put forth by the township and then by the planning commission. A lot of that was done by just the township board members, supervisor, and who was usually the manager at the same time. Anyway, reflecting on some of those ideas, it made me think about what was going on with that plan in this time frame that we're now in. And I know there is a future use plan, an existing zoning map that we use. And it occurred to me that a lot of it is interpretation, even when it's written down as a future use. Or even better still, a zoning map that we are guided by. And so I'm looking at the future use and I'm saying a lot of interpretation, a lot of work went into it, but when you see the term buffer, any term that has the term buffer in it is quite expansive and open for a lot of interpretation. And so I think that in future use, that's probably part by design, but maybe part by stepping away from being too committed to something for whatever reason it might be. But I do think that traffic patterns, in my mind, and this is what I really want to address, is the main focus of what I saw in a lot of those meetings. Traffic patterns, routes, and things. And that doesn't mean that people can't live on traffic patterns. It's done a lot. But it also means that there's other uses that might be addressed for traffic patterns and really considered and discussed and put down and not left to a lot of ambiguous interpretation, and more like specific interpretation is what I was thinking of. And that doesn't mean it has to come from a consultant or an advisor, which I think a lot of master plan work has been, but it's a guide, just like they were guiding us and we were guiding them. It's a back and forth, and it's an ongoing, and I think it's evolving, like I said, from the beginning. You almost start again when you finish. The evolution of the master plan, the zoning map, the future use map, the code itself. And so that's what I was thinking of when I was wanting to just say, zoning is a big issue, but I think traffic patterns drive a lot of it, and where we're talking about what we want to do with zoning, I think that that's some of the considerations that should be looked at as far as how we address the ongoing process. It seems like we're just getting to the end of a new one, but here we are already looking at ways to look at it differently. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comments? Seeing none, we'll thank the public for their comments, and we'll go ahead and close that up. There'll be extended public comment towards the end of the meeting. So at this point, we're ready to move on to our new business items. The first one is a special use permit application 2018-05. This one was actually on the September agenda, and we did hold the public hearing at that time, but the applicant and/or applicant's representative was not at that meeting, so a decision was made by the commission to postpone consideration of the request until this month when someone could be here. Is there anything else that needs to be said by way of introduction?
Nope. We did hold the public hearing as published in the paper. We did not go through section 30. We did not deliberate or debate at all the issue. We had just held the public hearing and then closed the public hearing and postponed. So if there is a representative or the applicant is present tonight, I think this time would be appropriate to give the applicant a time or a chance to speak on the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll invite the applicant to come forward, give us your name and address for the minutes, and then we'll be happy to hear what you have to say.
Okay. Mike Klump, 7700 South Whiteville, Shepherd.
Is there anything you'd like to
No, we're just applying for that special use to put a park and cell to locate, use about an acre to acre and a half space on the north end, put a new drive in to the north side of the property and bring it in there gravel parking lot and stuff, to put in there for a park and sell out on that side of town, so just trying to better use of that, area, so not the actual building and structure over here, but just, yeah, more the north end, so.
Are there questions from the commissioners for the applicant? Brian?
So the residence that's to the south on that
Yes.
property, that's not going to be used in this,
No. Nope.
which is why you have it segregated off just for that.
Yeah, it's just that,
One portion of the
pretty-
parcel.
And that's actually a lot larger than we're anticipating. It's actually gonna be about half that much space to the north that's in there. That's really outlined, so, that's probably at least a couple, 3 acres they have outlined there. We're gonna use about acre and a half on the very north end, so. So be away from that residence and stuff to the south, so.
So you're not going to be adding lights?
No, not anticipating any lights at this time, no.
So
Maybe
pri-
some signage out front we would put up, you know, and apply for the sign permit and stuff, but we wanted to wait till we got the zoning approval first
Right.
before we applied for a sign permit, so.
So hours of operation typically without lights would be during
Yeah,
daylight hours?
Daylight hours, yep.
Do you have anticipated feel for how many vehicles you might have on site at any given time?
You know, I think there'd be a good estimation of 20 to 25 in there, you know, at any one given one time, so.
And this is just automobiles too, correct?
Well, we'd like to be able to allow, you know, some other, you know, larger vehicles, say, if it was semi trucks or trailers or those kind of vehicles as well, you know, not just limited to a car or pickup, but especially being the rural, you know, ag area that we're in out there, so allowing some other things to come in as well.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Did you say that this plot, I'm sorry, you said how big this plot was, it's actually outlined here, correct? What was that?
Yeah, that's plenty big. It actually could. It's not going to be quite that large. It's going to be more to the north end of that. Maybe 3/4 of what's outlined there to the north. So it'd be further away from the commercial building and the residence on the south end than what it shows there. So kind of right along that access drive to the north and then back along Mission Road. So.
So just visually speaking here, I'm trying to think in my head is I see on the, what would be, I guess, the east side of the road there is a parcel line to the right of the star. Are you
Yes.
thinking maybe somewhere
Probably
that
somewhere in
north?
there is all the bigger
So-
that we'd need for that
Okay.
lot, yes, yep. We're putting a new driveway in down at the far north end of the property. We've applied for a driveway permit. We haven't had it granted yet by the road commission, but we've applied for driveway permit down there right next to the driveway that's there for the access drive. That actually goes to the cell tower that's in the back, but it'd be right next to that drive on the very north end of the property, so.
So with a permit like this, excuse me, but with a permit like this and with the pathway going through this property, are they restricted how close they can be to the pathway with a parking lot, or is that? Is there no restrictions on
How close the parked vehicles?
the gravel?
Gravel?
The gravel of the parking lot can be to the new pathway that runs through this lot.
There's a pretty large ditch that runs down through there. I don't know how familiar you are with the area, but there's a pretty large ditch. There's the walking path and a large ditch that comes up into the area that's there. So it'd be
Ditches on the
On
parking
the-
lot side, or?
yeah, on the
road
parking
side?
lot side. So it's the road, then it's the walk path, and there's
Okay.
probably a ditch that's maybe at least 20 feet across the ditch before it even comes to the property line. So there'd be no way to even get,
Yeah, that,
any closer than
I
20
didn't
feet,
remember that,
so-
and that, thank you for
yeah, so.
bringing that to my attention, because I'll take care of it.
No part of any public or private parking area, regardless of number of spaces, provided shall be closer than 5 feet to the public street or highway right-of-way line.
Thank you.
So you have, you mentioned cars and passenger vehicles, trucks, potentially selling semis. I'm assuming you have farm equipment in terms of tractors and equipment.
I'd like to be able to have it open for equipment or trailers or, you know, dump trailers, semi-trailers, those kind of things as well, yeah.
RVs, trailers, that sort of thing. I mean, recreational.
Sure, yeah, I would say that, if somebody come in and wanted to sell something like that, to be able to that allowed would be nice, yeah.
So essentially, you're not looking. It's essentially whatever comes in. There's not any type of vehicle or anything like that you probably wouldn't take in.
Yeah, at this point, I can't think of a whole lot. You know, you see a lot of these park and sell lots that are established. I think there's some in town, even on the other side of town. I don't think I've seen all sorts of things in those. I guess I can't think of a lot of limitations that I can think of off the top of my head, you know, so.
By park and sell, I'm assuming you mean you're not retaining title. This is people using the space.
Correct. Yep.
And you're essentially leasing that space.
Yep. Just leasing that space. Yep.
So you're gonna have people come in the existing drive and in, or there's gonna be another entrance from?
Yeah, I don't own the existing drive to the north, so there'd be another drive we're putting on the property there, just south of the north property line. Be a new drive coming in there.
Does that require, like, road commission approval, or?
Yeah, any kind of curb cut would require a road commission permit.
And you say it's gonna be like hard gravel
Yeah, gravel parking lot. Yep.
and just totally open, no fence, no
Correct.
enclosed?
Yep.
Other questions?
Is this gonna require a site plan to be submitted?
Yeah,
That's
special use
awesome.
permits, they do require site plans. I gave you my memo from September's meeting, in case you guys didn't hold on to it from last month's meeting. So in this package, you have the recycled items from last month. Typically, a site plan is required with all special use permits unless there's something waived by the planning commission as far as how detailed the site plan, the requirements on the site plan. We did have a special use permit to sell vehicles south of this property, but with that special use, there was no paving involved, there was no changes made. It was simply designating an area where vehicles could be sold. In this case, we will have permanent changes made to the site, and so in my recommendation, I did recommend that a site plan would be approved by the planning commission. At this time, we're just considering the use.
Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Or are you ready to move on to the the list of criteria?
Let's move on.
Okay, so we'll thank you for your comments, and I'm assuming you're not going anywhere, so if there any other questions come up, we'll direct them to you.
Okay. If there is, I'm actually on a board in another meeting that I'm supposed to be at in Shepherd right now. I was gonna gonna lead unless there's other comment later that needs to be addressed, but I
Um,
was gonna go make my board meeting
Okay.
about 20 minutes late if I could, so.
that's totally up to you. I think we're good. I mean, people have asked questions, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Okay, so, just as a reminder, we use the, list on, 30-3 in the zoning, ordinance. I'll go ahead and read the item, and then, I'll ask for comment, and if anyone has any concerns, they should raise them as we go through each point. The special use shall be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained in a manner harmonious with the character of adjacent property and the surrounding area.
I guess I'll jump in, but bear with me. And looking at the future land use, we identified this as neighborhood service. Neighborhood service, defined as located primarily along corridors adjoining lower intensity land uses. It's on, Peter provided that for us. And so when I was looking at this, I was trying to make sure it gave that flavor to me. And I'm not making an argument that it does not. I'm just pointing out that that I felt was a critical benchmark that we should be looking at.
But it's already zone B4.
It is B4, right?
It's almost like you'd be digressing to something smaller than B4 if you go to the master plan.
Yeah, but it's a special use in a B4 rather than like a B5, right?
Correct.
Where it's allowed without special use. Yeah, I wasn't making an argument that it didn't meet that. I'm just
Okay.
wanted to bring that up.
Other thoughts from people? I mean, it's kind of a diverse area. You've got some residences, but you also have the storage units. There's a relatively nondescript business building immediately to the south. You've got open land across the street. So,
And that whole stretch is, at least future land use wise, is commercial, light commercial, neighborhood service.
You know, I look at it as more, there's nothing that says that it's not in character, but there's nothing that says that it's defined that there is in character. It's just kind of nebulous in that regard. So, but because of the B4 in that area, I would have to answer probably more yes than no. It's within the character and the future land use. It looks to be more that way.
other comments? Any concerns? Any opposing comments or thoughts? Hearing none, we'll move on. And some of these are, as we've observed many times before, they're kind of related. The special use shall not change the essential character of the surrounding area.
Because it's such vacancy, I'm not sure what the character is of that area.
Other than what is intended for it, right?
That's right,
Right.
except for what it's intended for. Right. I would agree.
Other thoughts? The special use shall not interfere with the general enjoyment of adjacent property.
I had one concern here, but I think this is more a matter of the site plan, and that would be protecting the residents to the west. As far as the applicant did indicate that daylight hours are the primary use of operation, but I could see that being a park and sell that people may drive in at 10 o'clock at night because there's a vehicle that catches their eye. But I think that's more of a matter of the site plan review versus how this is being used.
Agreed.
Okay, other thoughts? Special use shall not be hazardous to adjacent property or involve uses, activities, materials, or equipment that will be detrimental to the health, safety, or welfare of persons or property through the excessive production of traffic noise, smoke, odor, fumes, or glare.
The only concern that I have, and again, we might bring this up in the site plan, is, you know, from the odor or so forth, is that you have vehicles and there's that water, so even though there may be a distance, but whether there's a concern with hazardous waste, you know, oil, gasoline, whatever, leaking from the vehicles. That would be my only concern, but whether that would be brought up in the site plan, in the appropriate safety in regards to that. That was the only thing that I could really thought. Especially as you think in semis, you got diesel fuel and so forth. So
Yeah.
What would one propose in a site plan to mitigate that concern?
I don't know what that is. We'll decide that on the site plan. Whether it's appropriate gravel, whether you do that from a gravel, there's the thickness of the gravel. I don't know how you do that. But
Right. Gravel's not a filtering device, so
whether you need to do something in regards to, well, I don't know. I don't know what that would be, but that would be that was the only thought that I had.
Yeah.
essentially operating vehicles don't leak. I mean, if you could put some sort of, you know, it's not a broke down vehicle sales yard, and it's not a wrecked vehicle sales yard or something to that effect.
Yeah, but I mean, vehicles do sometimes leak oil. I mean, they shouldn't, but they do sometimes, but.
Well, you have that driving up and down the road. It
Right.
goes in the catch basins.
But that's an engineered surface where the gravel's not.
Right, the engineered surface conveys it right to the drainage structure and into the rivers.
Okay.
I
yield.
asphalt.
Right, right.
I yield.
Right.
Other thoughts on this one? Okay, the special use shall be adequately served by essential public utilities and services, or it shall be demonstrated that the person responsible for the proposed special use shall be able to continually provide adequate services and facilities deemed essential to the special use under consideration. The said facilities or services shall be approved by the Central Michigan District Health Department. Sounds like there are no plans for services on the site.
However, if you would give him that whole special use, could he come back and because that whole piece becomes, or is this what he's asking for, like that?
The
That
portion
blue
that
area.
that is shown, right now we only have a sketch, that if you require a site plan, which I recommended that you do, the portion that is located on the site plan would be the only spot that they could have sales on, and none of the other remaining parcel. If they chose to expand, they'd have to amend the special use and come back asking to expand the site of where cars or vehicles or trailers would be sold.
So we're specifically talking about the 1 to 1.5 acres on the north end of the site.
Yeah,
Wow.
basically, if the applicant wanted to utilize the entire parcel for a park and sell operation, and yet we only approved a portion of it, the applicant would have to come back and amend the special use to utilize the entire parcel.
Could you flip back to the other real quick? Okay. So yeah, it's not even the full depth, so it's quite a distance from those houses to the west. Or some distance anyway.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So
The
if
one
he's
thing-
only asking for this blue piece, and there's enough room to put a building on there where he wants to bring a septic tank, well, would he have to come back from a site plan and request that? Okay, thank you.
I guess what I'd like to address is that, by his own words, he said he doesn't need as much space as what's outlined. And when I asked him if that property line there across the road was an approximation of how much space he might need, he said yes, that would be. So maybe, he said 25%, I don't know, to me that looks like about 30% if you take that line across the road. So I guess I'm wondering, if we were to approve this, would we approve what he's this, or we would approve what he said he needs, which is a smaller space than this?
What you would do is if you require a site plan, what is shown on the site plan, you would tie the site plan to the special use. And regardless of what this sketch shows.
So are you saying that we are not bound to by the dimensions of this sketch?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe we're just
So
looking
what
at, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Buckley.
I guess what my question becomes is, if we approve a special use now, and let's say that my concern about the space that he describes needed, that's smaller, if we just approve the special use now, how do we, if he comes in with a site plan that shows this size, or even larger than this size, do we walk back that special use? You know what I mean? Like, how do we know what size we're approving if this is not, if we're not bound by this size?
Well, you have two options. One, you can hold off and ask the applicant to come back with a site plan done. Or two, if you were to recommend approval, when the site plan is brought for approval at a later meeting, if it is, larger or radically different than what you as a group thought you were approving, you could request that the area be smaller or what you had thought it was going to be. Otherwise, you wouldn't be bound to have to approve the site plan.
I know we've got a few more points to go through, and I don't mind going through the points. And I'm not necessarily against a special use, but I do feel a little bit strange about approving a special use and then looking. I would love to be able to see a special use request and a review of the site plan at the same time, so we know exactly what we're approving when we approve the special use. We know the size, we know the borders. But I'm not necessarily against the special use in general. I just would like to see what those borders, the real border, actually looks like that we're approving.
And just a note to the Planning Commission, we have done it both ways. We typically will review a special use permit with a site plan at the same time. We have also at times reviewed the use ahead of a site plan. It's sort of a benefit to the applicant to see if the uses will actually have a chance of passing before they spend money on a site plan, but both options, we've used both.
The thing about this one, though, is the site plan is probably going to be fairly rudimentary. I mean, it's going to show where the curb cut is going to be. It's going to show the portion that's going to be made into gravel. I don't know how much else it's going to show. Is it going to show, like, the stripes of the lines where the vehicles are going to be parked? I really don't know.
Personally, my only concern, what I want to see in the site plan, is the actual size of the parcel that he wants to use.
Yeah.
And see how that, if anything, how that differs from what's actually
Well,
on the screen.
As an option, could we, if we were to approve this, approve it with contingent on approval of site plan and put a contingency on the dimensions tied to the site plan as well? So we're not giving a dimension. We're saying we're acceptable to this use, but we'll define the dimensions of that SUP. Is that reasonable, Peter? Based on what we see when the site plan comes in?
So you would recommend approval on the condition that a site plan is approved, and then what's the note about the dimensions?
That since we don't really have dimensions, that the dimensions would be determined with the site plan review.
Yeah, that would be, yeah, I mean, that
Yeah,
would be a part of the site plan.
Yeah, because once we order a site plan, unless you, as a board, decide to waive certain requirements that are shown in the site plan, everything that a site plan is shall be shown has to be shown. So it'll be a full site plan. It'll show the whole, you know, the
Right, but
area
if-
of, you know,
If the parking lot is much smaller as he proposed, then we could say that's your dimension for the special use.
yes.
Well, there appears to be some support for approving the special use in in theory, until we have the site plan. So to Peter's point, the applicant can at least know that they have a chance that its system essentially, you know, going in the right direction, but contingent on the site plan being approved. That's the only holdup for me until I see the site plan. I think the use is a good use. It's just, what is the site plan so that we know what we're approving?
And that's kind of where I am. I think that, and again, we can finish going through these criteria too, but I think that I'm generally supportive of this, but when we have an applicant who tells us, well, I don't need that much space, I tend to take a special use pretty seriously, and that, you know, and if by our applicant's own words, they're saying, I don't need that much space, I prefer to make the, through a site plan, I prefer to make the special use applicable to what they're asking for, and not just what we're inclined to give. So I think if we can do as Commissioner Milky suggested, I think that would be a reasonable solution.
Okay, Peter, in order to, could you also say in this motion is that the special use permit and the area that is defined here, in the blue or whatever, that the site plan is no greater than this particular area, so it's not the whole lot. It's just, he's gotta be within these, he can't be any greater than that. He can go smaller, but he can't go any greater than that. And that we would be fine with a site plan with that stipulation. Without having a true dimension, but this would have to be our dimension. That's all we've got.
Well, I think,
Versus the whole,
Well, and but again, though, we don't even have the dimensions on this drawing, and so I don't know how far north and how far west this line even goes.
right, but if I gotta believe technology would, because by just looking at these lot lines and so forth, you would probably get pretty darn close.
There's a scale right on the side.
Yeah, so I gotta believe we could get pretty darn close. So that, again, he knows that it's not the whole parcel.
but what I'm hearing is that, at least, I'm hearing that there's a potential desire to restrict him even further beyond the size of this. Because he said that he didn't think he said he probably was only gonna use the northern 3/4 of it. And so I think what we were trying to do was make sure that we reserve the right to do that if we want to send this forward as a general recommendation to later say, okay, you know, your plan really should be on just the northern 3/4 of that.
Well, again, he said that, but you know, and again, he may decide to do something larger, which is fine, but he can't go any larger than that.
I mean, if
He
there
goes
is any
smaller, but and he might go right with exactly what he said, but he can't go any larger than this.
Well, what I'd recommend to you guys, we've started the section 31 through 10. If there is a concern, the applicant has, if you ultimately decide that a site plan would be needed, required, full site plan, the applicant will have to come to a future meeting. So even if you were to recommend approval of the special use today, this would not be final. It would not be the last step in the process. And so if there is any kind of concern, you can simply pause now, get back to the applicant that you'd like to see a site plan, and that you could better make a decision at that point.
And if we made a motion to approve or deny, it goes to the Board of Trustees at this point, right? Which, it sounds like what I'm hearing from the commissioners is they'd like to see the site plan almost in partnership with this, right? In which case, maybe we don't want to move this to the Board of Trustees until we see that site plan.
If there's a concern with several commissioners in regards to the size, then yes, it automatically takes you there. Again, I'm okay with, again, looking at, for me, is site plan or the approval of the special use, and as I'm looking at this area that is on this particular picture is, okay, if it's no larger than this, it's not the entire parcel, I would be okay with that myself. And if he goes smaller, great, as he mentioned, he might decide to do that. Smaller is wonderful, but not larger. So that would be, that's, again, my comment in regards to that. If in fact there's an issue with putting this forward without the site, without it seeing the actual site plan.
Well, I think we're getting a little off track here. We're just here focused on the use itself.
Correct.
The site plan is a completely separate issue. So
Correct.
we can approve this with contingent upon the site plan.
Yep.
We're just approving the use.
I would agree.
Once the site plan comes in, and if it's too big, too small, it's situated somewhere else completely different than what was described, at that time, I think that's when you say, well, we're not gonna pass the site plan. So, or we make those revisions at that time. I think we're getting into some minutia that has nothing to do with the use itself. Strictly use.
I think that's
Great questions, great points, but I think we're here to focus on, do we all think this is acceptable in this area?
What I've heard from commissioners is I think by and large it's acceptable. I think where the sticking point is that because we don't have a dimension, that seems to be the sticking point. Is that accurate?
But we will. We're approving the
Site
use
plan.
based on
Yeah,
the
but
site
typically
plan
if you're going to do a
approval.
special use, you're going to lock that special use, in this case, to certain dimensions, right? That's typical.
Once we get the site plan and we can look at what the dimensions he's doing, if he's got the whole parcel, then we can say, well, no, that's not what we had in mind. And we can not approve or deny the site plan, to my understanding.
But the special use is still there.
Right.
Yeah, but
No,
we could tie it
This
to
is
the-
contingent on the site plan.
okay.
Tied to-
That's
Yeah,
fine.
he wouldn't be able to use it if he doesn't have an approved site plan.
I'm sorry. I'll take my turn here.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was the one, I think, that raised this issue in terms of nailing down the actual size. But I do think Commissioner LaBelle is correct, and I think that Commissioner Webster is correct. This will be tied to the site plan. If we don't like the site plan, we have an opportunity to say the size of the special use is not appropriate, and it can all collapse at that point. So I'm comfortable in focusing on the use tonight and then just putting a contingency on with the site plan.
Okay. So back to the list. Number 6, when deemed necessary by the Township Board or Planning Commission, the use shall be adequately screened by distance and landscaping to protect the rights of all adjoining property. That again seems like something you would address at the site plan stage. Number 7, my favorite one, it takes the longest to read. The Township Board or Planning Commission, in connection with approval of any application, may require reasonable undertaking by the applicant to guarantee and assure by agreement, including a performance bond to be posted by the applicant or by some other reasonable surety arrangement at appropriate stages of the plan development, that the development will be executed in accordance with the approved plan. Okay. And it always draws lots of comment. That such use will be an asset to the township.
It's a business, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the argument is that that's a rural area, it's close to rural area, would give people an outlet for selling items and would serve a useful purpose.
I think it would get vehicles out of people's front yards
Mhm.
and put them in this lot.
Okay, other thoughts on that? Requirements and conditions of each individual special use permitted shall be complied with unless otherwise mentioned within this section. Okay. Any special use permit may be revoked by the Union Township Board upon recommendation of the Union Township Planning Commission whenever the operation fails to comply with any of the required conditions or may be subject to the penalties of this ordinance. And then there's the reminders that the approval stays with the property, and if the special use is not commenced within 1 year from the date of issuance, the permit can be voided by the Planning Commission. So further discussion, we can have a motion.
I move to approve SUP 2018-8 contingent on the approval of the site plan.
Support.
Okay, I'll just clarify 2018-05, I think. Am I, that's what's on my
Oh, I'm
agenda.
sorry. Must have a tab.
So the motion to recommend approval to the Township Board of the special use permit application was made by Webster, and the second was by Buckley? Okay. Further discussion. And so the condition is that the only condition? The condition is contingent on approval of a site plan.
Just wanted to remind the board, is there any issue with if we approve this, the applicant would then be allowed to sell new or used cars, trucks, boats, farm equipment, mobile homes, travel trailers, and motorhomes. So just to keep in mind if there's any issue that the board would have with any of those vehicles, or if all are fine, just make note of it.
Okay. Let me ask one other question. So, screening and lighting would come in at the point of the site plan, but what about days and hours of operation? That would have to be, that would have to be specified in this motion. Is that true or no?
At this time, because we're dealing with the use, it would be appropriate to talk about hours of operation.
Okay. Does anyone have any concerns about hours of operation?
You could always add an additional just daylight hours, because he's not gonna put any lighting. I mean, I don't think that's gonna hurt. He said it himself. So if it makes anybody feel any better, we could always add that if needed.
That's what he said he wanted, or intended.
Yeah.
I think that would be reasonable.
That's fine.
I mean, if he needs to extend it later for some reason, he can come back and have that restriction
Yeah.
lifted if it was necessary.
I mean, it's an unmanned facility, so I'm not sure.
Right.
There's no open and close sign.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to be free to come in there and look at vehicles during the evening if they want to. So what's your pleasure? Do you want to have that in the motion or no? Daylight hours?
I have a quick question. Is 5425 residential across the street? 5425.
I believe it is zone B4.
Okay.
Zone B4.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, the only residential, correct, Peter, is what's behind it on the west side?
R4.
Okay.
So is
Oh.
that non-conforming or is
Possibly to the north.
To the north,
Right.
right.
Which one?
that the residential across the street? Is that just
That's not residential, it's B4.
right? But
Yeah, it's the future land use that doesn't have that
It's non-conforming.
cutout with the,
Gotcha.
Well, so, I assume.
Yeah.
Is
So
5425 non-conforming?
It'd be existing non-conforming.
It is, okay.
So because the applicant's not here, but I think the nature of this business is not that he's gonna be standing there selling the cars.
Correct. Yep.
People are gonna just drive in at their own will when they can see these vehicles
Mhm.
and look them over. Whether it's with headlights
Or a full moon.
or full moon, but.
Or in the daytime.
Right. So to talk about
Probably when most people are.
hours of operation, I know I'm gonna stop them whenever I get a chance when I go by there, unless somebody shuts the gate.
Well, the only point I would make about that is that, I mean, we approve these in perpetuity. So if he were to sell and somebody were to come in and say, well, I'm installing lights and I'm gonna install lights, I'm gonna run this
permit.
until midnight, that's what we'd be addressing future use as well as his proposed use.
would a modification like that, the installation of light posts would that prompt a site plan review?
It possibly could. It may not. It's one of those, it's a gray area.
Could you put that the intended use is during the daylight hours? Would that then remove the possibility of lights? When we say it's intended to be during the daylight hours? So he couldn't have a 2 a.m. lights and they're on, dusk to dawn? Daylight hours?
But again, with the site plan review, if he has lights on there, his intentions have changed.
But if he puts it on later, will that require a site plan
Might not.
modification?
This
If
is
it does not, then he would never know he could put lights on.
This
He
is
just
where
has to
the-
ask for a permit.
special use diverges from the site plan. Is how seriously do we want to concern ourselves with potential light pollution in the future if we don't stipulate hours now?
If the commission wanted to condition that there'd be no parking or selling of vehicles past daylight hours or before daylight hours, I don't see where that would hurt the applicant, and I think it would give some of the members comfort for any kind of future situation.
How is the applicant gonna stop people driving in there at 2 a.m. to look at a car that has got somebody else's phone number on there that's selling it? They're not even calling him about the car, they're calling the person selling the car.
I don't think that's what it's intended to stop. I think what it's intended to potentially trigger in the future is that applicant or someone else to come back to us and ask for permission to install
Gotcha.
lights.
Right.
Like right now.
With
Yeah.
no lot lights, this special use permit is contingent on no lot lights being installed.
Because if we approve it without the contingency, they only have to get a permit to get lights. They don't have to come back to this body to request lights. If we don't.
That's the only thing I'm trying to figure out. Is there a way to just trigger a request?
You
Because
can make the
it may
condition that if
change.
lights are installed, that the applicant would have to come back to the commission for a new site plan amendment.
Because as long as we can review it, I mean, conditions may change in the future where lights are appropriate.
Absolutely.
I have a problem with lights being installed if they're down shielded. I don't think it changes the use, and I'm not sure with residential housing as far away as it is today, I don't think the lights are gonna be abusive to the neighbors.
But the intention of installing lights is the intention to make use after hours. You're not just installing lights to shine them down on vacant cars. The intent would be to further sales after hours.
A park and sell is 24/7.
I get that.
And I think lights would be more for vehicle security. Somebody's vehicle, kids not breaking into them when it's full on dark. I'm not against lights, actually. I think our lighting ordinance is strong enough to warrant even putting lights there.
Okay, well, the motion on the floor is to recommend approval of the, recommend approval of the special use permit with the sole condition that a site plan is subsequently approved by us. So unless someone amends their motion and the seconder agrees, then that's the motion. So further discussion on the motion that is on the floor. Ready to vote? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Next item is a rezone request, 2018-04. Request is to rezone parcels at 2010 and 2040 East Broomfield Road from R2A to B4. This will be a public hearing, and so I will ask Peter to introduce the topic.
And so we'll be holding a public hearing. Notice was sent out to residents within 300 feet and published in the papers required by law. A rezoning of 2010 and 2040 East Broomfield Road, currently zoned R2A, which is a low-density residential district, 1 and 2 family, to B4, which is a general business district. Looking at the current zoning, you can note that the yellow is the R2A, and these are the 2 subject parcels. The off yellow is R1, a rural residential, and white is represented by agricultural. The nearest B4 property is to the east. There is no other B4 property in the area. If there's any other questions I can answer after the public hearing, but at this time I believe it would be appropriate to have a public hearing. I do have a letter that was in the packet for everyone in the commission, or all 9 of the commissioners, but I will be reading the letter for public comment, unless the person is here and they can make their comment themselves.
Okay. So, as Peter indicated, all rezone requests are accompanied by a public hearing. We'll have the public hearing now. We'll give everyone who wishes to address the Planning Commission on this topic an opportunity to do so. Hold on, I'm not done. Thank you. We'll give everyone an opportunity to address the Commission. When you do so, come forward to the table, give us your name and address for the minutes, address your comments to the Commission, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. After everyone who wishes to speak has been given an opportunity to speak, if someone wishes to speak again, we'll consider that, given time and other considerations. And after the public hearing is closed, then we'll proceed and we'll give the applicant an opportunity to address the Planning Commission and stand for questions. So at this time, the public hearing is open at 8:02. If there's anyone who would like to address the Planning Commission, they're welcome to do so at this time.
My name is Joe Falsetta, and I own the 2 properties, the 2010 and the 2040 East Broomfield Road, and I'm the one that's requesting the B4. Traffic has just become tremendous on that corner. They're going to widen the road to 5 lanes wide for 500 feet in front of my property. They're going to make 3 lanes back to the bridge, 3 lanes up Lincoln, well actually 5 lanes back to the bridge, I'm sorry. 3 lanes up Lincoln Road behind me, and then 3 lanes toward Riverwood. So they're going to change the intersection dramatically. The traffic has become unbelievable. And I believe that the township and the city are starting to set up a ring road that's going to go around Mount Pleasant. And I think since they completed the bridge, step number 1, step number 2, they're going to change the intersection. And it's going to be, I mean, I've been there almost 50 years, 49 years, and the traffic has just become just tremendous. And there's also a B4 properties to my east, the driving range, the jump center, and across the street, used to be a bread and breakfast. The 2 other properties across the street from me aren't B4, but they're being used for businesses. I don't believe anybody is going to build any houses from the bridge to my corner. And I don't think anybody's gonna build any houses into the rest of the way into Union Township, because Union Township has grown tremendously to the west. The cars that go by my house are phenomenal. I got a count from the county before they shut the bridge down. In 24-hour period, 7,350 some cars went by my house in one 24-hour period. I understand the concern from the that you're kind of creating an island there, a B4 that's not attached to anything else. But I think if my wife and I were to try to sell the houses now, couldn't do it as residential. And we have no immediate plans on selling the house. I think what we're just trying to do is come up with more options for us. You know, I mean, we've been here almost 49 years. If we decide to move, then we can sell them as residents, or we can sell them as a B4. Other than that, my concern is just the traffic. It's just become just tremendous, and I think it's going to get worse once the road's completed, and that'll be sometime next summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment?
Good evening. Ben Gutting. I own 2270 and 2280 East Broomfield, and it'd be the driving range that you see up here. Also, my residence has also been zoned commercial since the mid-90s, and the house next door to me has also been zoned commercial since the same time period. Across the street, the house that used to be a bed and breakfast and currently is a residence, that's a B4. The old comic shop that Mr. Beebe had purchased, that's also a B4 area. So this really all started in Joe. Obviously we've been neighbors for well over 30 years. I've been at my facility for 45. So we've known each other a long time, and our conversation went to the changes and how things have changed since we first moved into that area. And the first thing that comes up is obviously the traffic. For a business, it's wonderful. But for Mr. Falsetta being on the corner, whenever I pulled into his driveway, it's virtually impossible to get out now, let alone when the intersection is widened next summer, and he virtually has traffic lights, a 5-lane intersection in his front yard. And the overall design of this is supposed to be, it's a trucking route. So Broomfield, as you see it from Lincoln to Crawford, in 5 years is going to be completely different. It's going to be 3 lanes, curb and gutter, and it's going to be a commercial thoroughfare. And so with Mr. Falsetta, it's not about him having to sell it now because he's got a buyer. It's just that Joe's been there for over almost 50 years. And he's looking at it going, I'm never going to be able to sell this as a residence. And it's true. I mean, I believe the same thing. My house that I live in, and I've lived in our house for 31 years, and my wife and I both know that we're the last people that are going to live there as homeowners, because that road is going to be a commercial thoroughfare. And so what he's doing is protecting his interests, and like any of us would, is that area has changed dramatically. And here you've got Mr. Figg, who's been there forever and a day. We've got Mr. Whitehead's family, who's been there for 100 and how many years? Almost 150. And I think all of us would look at this and say, you know, back in the day when Carl Recker had the farm in between, which is basically the only piece of property that you see between Mr. Falsetta and B4 is just a long stretch of a farm. And I think if you ask Mr. Whitehead right now, you know, what his property is going to be, I think he would certainly tell you that when and if he decides to sell, and this is his grandfather's property, or father's property, I should say.
Great grandfather's property.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it just that area has changed, and it's going to change, and that's part of evolution, right? Across the street, you've got an active gravel pit, twofold, and then you have another area on the corner that, you know, has been used for a fill area for years. So it's not this is a tidy residential area that's going to be disturbed. It's not. It's an area in transition. And so that's my 2 cents worth. Like I said, I've been there forever, and I can concur with everything that he's saying. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, keep it very brief. I've submitted the letter, so you should have that. My main concern with the rezoning is that there's no determination of what's going to come in the property. My property butts up right to the south of Joe's. It's very close in proximity. I can certainly empathize with Joe on the traffic. I agree, the traffic is greatly increased through there. And I mean, I hear it at my house too. Our main concern is with no specification of what business might come in there, what I might be looking at 10, 15 feet off my driveway in the future. It's good that, you know, for now there's, you know, no concern. Joe's not moving next month or next year. So conditions probably will remain status quo for now. But whoever decides to buy that at that point with a B4 with no contingencies, I understand, could be opened up for any multitude of businesses. And so then what would our family be looking at as far as, you know, what business in there? Maybe a quiet office or something like that with 9 to 5 business hours would certainly be, I think, okay to live next to, but maybe something with extended hours in the evenings and night times and weekends, of possible street lights or who knows what would come in, just not knowing what we'd be next to would be my source of contention, I guess, here, opposing the zoning. So.
Thank you.
For clarification, you, Mr. Bryant?
Yes, Mr.
Okay.
Bryant.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryant, would you still wish me to read the letter, or the fact that the commissioners have the letter and you're here, is that satisfactory?
I'm assuming that you've all read it. You may read it if you deem appropriate. I haven't been to a meeting before, so I'm not sure what, you know, is typically appropriate or not, and I don't want to take up any more time than necessary. I respect that. So whatever you find is what you feel is best.
Typically, if you weren't here, we'd read it.
Okay.
But I know I've read it.
Yeah, I think we've all read it, so I'm going to suggest that we don't actually read it because you've had an opportunity to address us directly.
Yes, I mainly want to be available if you had any questions or needed any clarifications.
Okay. And the letter was included in our packet, so
Right.
it'd be on the website, right? Township website, if anyone wanted to see it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comments?
You need to get softer chairs, one thing. Bill Whitehead, 1474 East Broomfield Road, and I'm not here for this reason, but everybody's talking about traffic, and try to drive a tractor on that road. It's crazy. I've always said to the county commissioner, if they would blacktop Deerfield Road, that would eliminate a lot of traffic and would go directly into town. And if they wanted to take the highway, if you see how many people go down Broomfield Road and then they turn at the college to get on the highway, and that would open up Union Township. If you had a blacktop road on Deerfield, you've already got water there, it would open up more residential area. But from Whiteville to Crawford, it's a gravel road. They did a nice job, they fixed it up. But if you put that blacktop, you would eliminate a lot of traffic going through Broomfield and going through the college. I don't know who I have to talk to. You guys, you know, who makes that decision? What's the cost for a mile of road? $1 million, $100,000 a mile, something like that.
very expensive. But that would give Union Township, you have access to water already there, and it would open up that other area.
Thank you. Other public comments?
Marty Fig, 810 Ashland Drive, and I'd like to make reference to the age-old term ring road, which has become almost, you know, what would you call it? It's almost keeps hanging around like, wow, we're tired of hearing of that because it just keeps talking about it and never gets done. But it's going to get done, and it's getting done. Next year there's a section of it, and it keeps coming. But the roads everybody knows, Isabella, Broomfield, Pickard, and Lincoln. Those are the roads. And that coordinates with what's been going on with a lot of the talk that's been going on with your decisions that you've been faced with over the last several months, even years. And that's connected with that ring road system, and is part of the sidewalk pathway concept, which is a big part of it. All of it deals with moving people, moving vehicles. That's what we talked about tonight when we went to the vehicle selling park. That's what we talk about with Chuck, with a lot of his stuff that he's got. Vehicles. A lot of vehicles are moving. What are we talking about here? Movement, traffic, vehicles. The Pathways and Subcommittee of the Pathways and Sidewalk Committee said, we demand, we require sidewalks on which roads? Isabella, Broomfield, Lincoln, and Pickard. Right there it is. That corridor, without much effort and support from the planning bodies of Union Township, is managed over the years, over the decades, the many decades, going back as far as almost Union Township exists, has produced against a lot of, what would you call it? I would say not encouragement to develop that way, but it's developed that way anyhow. There's been lots of jobs, lots of economy, lots of people have made money on that corridor of Broomfield and Lincoln. A lot of them are here tonight to represent it, but it goes back a long ways. And what I'm suggesting is that that is the idea that corridors are made for, is how do they best provide the goods and services of our community that we need. Looking to the future, I think that's where the Planning Commission, that's the charge, is to say planning. Looking forward, what are suggestions? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comments? We normally let the applicant speak separately when we're done with this. It's become a thing for the applicants to participate in the public hearing, but it was never intended for that purpose. But anyway, other public comment. Anyone who has not spoken on this topic that would like to address the Planning Commission? Going once? Going twice? So we'll thank the public for their comments, and we'll close the public comment portion here, and close the public hearing. So now we're at the point where normally we give the applicant an opportunity, unless there's something you would like to say at this point, but normally we give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission and stand for questions, and then we deliberate.
Well, after all the public comment, so if you look to the memo, and after I'm done, then the applicant, if they have any other further comments, but just to give the commission and everyone a better, clear picture of the two parcels. When we do rezonings, we look at our future land use map of our master plan. It's a guide that we use when we're looking at rezonings. The future land use map indicates this area as rural preservation. Rural preservation areas outside of the growth boundary should be maintained at a low intensity rural character of, excuse me, I'm reading the wrong memo. Apologize.
Rural buffer.
Rural buffer Rural buffer areas generally do not have sewer and water but are appropriate for agricultural, low-density residential, and other uses allowed by zoning. Typically, this buffer is located on the fringe between rural and more urbanized areas. Rezoning requests for more intensive uses should be limited, especially those requiring extended utility service. In my memo, I gave you guys a couple of options and recommendations. I know rezonings can at times be contentious issues, and so I gave you recommendations for and against rezoning. The recommendation against would be the rezone could be a spot zone and that it does not fit the zoning around it. The rezone request does not conform to the future land use map, leapfrog development. Recommend for, despite being outside of the growth management boundary, the expansion of Lincoln and Broomfield Road could promote a desire for more commercial property. Ultimately, when I was looking at the rezoning request myself, it becomes an issue of, we know that the roads are expanding and this could possibly bring more business to the area. And so the question is, at what time would it be appropriate to consider changing any of the existing R1, R2A property on Broomfield Road to a business district?
Okay, thank you. So at this point, without objection, I will give the applicant an opportunity to briefly address us because he's addressed us already. But if there's anything else you'd like to say, and if the commissioners have any questions for the applicant, they can also ask them.
Just a couple of points, I guess. I've got the layout that I picked up. I don't know if you've seen the map where they're going to reroute, how they're going to make the traffic flow or the road or whatever, any of that. I picked that up, but a couple points I'd like to make before I get started. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I have this changed to a B4, and if it goes through and it's changed, and then Johnny Smith comes and buys my property from me, and he wants to put a party store in, let's say, he still has to come back to the township board and get that approved, doesn't he? Just because it's a B4, it doesn't automatically happen. He still has to come here and go through the whole process of getting it rezoned, or not rezoned, but
A site plan would have to be approved.
pardon?
Yeah.
A site plan would have to be
Right,
approved.
yeah.
There is a list of permitted uses in B4.
That's right. He would,
So-
for the uses that are listed on that sheet that I got from you guys, he would still have to come back in front of you, even though, because it's a B4 doesn't necessarily mean that he's gonna get
It
that.
could be
Well,
any one of
if
these.
it's any one of those,
if it's a
it
use
will
by
be.
right,
Right.
they have to be
Yeah,
approved.
they have to
Okay.
be approved, as long as you meet zoning.
All right. And then another comment I'd like to make is that all the property that's across the street from me, either on the west side or directly across the street from me, nobody's gonna build a house there. It's not gonna happen. It's just gonna be too busy with traffic. You're not gonna build right on an expressway, which is about what that's gonna be. There's so many trucks and cars and whatever that go by there. It's a direct route from Big Rapids or whatever to get to campus. I mean, anything west of Mount Pleasant comes to get through to get to campus. That's the way they go. They don't go into town. The trucks don't go into town. They can't make the turn, so they come right by the house. So I don't see any new homes, if that's your concern, any new homes being built on Lincoln Road or even on Broomfield. The township line, does it run just past the Jump Center or whatever? That's about where the township and the city limits come together. There'll be no new houses built there. I just don't see it happening. But that's my personal opinion, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is before us now. It's open for discussion. Don't all jump in at once.
See, I think this intersection, this corner, when we were doing this future land use map, I all along said that needed to be commercial. I knew what was coming with the roads, with the bridge. but I met opposition and it wasn't future planned that way.
Yeah, I don't think there was any debate that the expansion of the road was happening. I think the debate centered around whether or not that meant it would be commercial or not, right?
Well, you have traffic, you have people provide services to these people, and that's what
Right.
they do.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the primary reason that it's what it is because we couldn't agree. And so it was more or less left in its current state. I mean, I don't disagree that what they're doing to the roads is going to affect this corner of the township. But at the same time, it hasn't done it yet, and we're actually just now starting to revamp our zoning ordinance, and who knows what the available zones are going to be. They could change. I feel that personally, I feel this is premature by at least a few years, and I greatly sympathize with the other resident in the sense that what might end up being more appropriate there might be something along the office service line than a general B4. Commissioner Cody?
I myself don't feel comfortable approving it to be changed at this time. Just going with the future land use map. That's just me.
I had similar thoughts. I mean, first thing I did was get out the master plan because that's what you should do in a rezone is look at that future land use. And premature, I think, is the word that you used. And maybe that's where I'm at, is that may come sometime, but it's premature.
I mean, it's quite possible that the next time that the future land use map is revised, that there will be significant discussion about that corner of the township. It was discussed for sure, but it was not. It didn't end up to be the primary focus this time, but it may well be in 5 years or whatever it might be.
Have we had? It seems to me we have applications come before us in the past where it was a site plan that was contingent on the rezoning as well. That they were. It seems like we have.
Seems like we have, yeah.
I guess
at the very least, you've had purchase agreements that are contingent on rezoning going through.
Contingent, yeah.
We would have a site plan if the rezoning was contingent on a project, a development, where in this case there is no project or development. It's simply the rezoning.
But the point you're getting at is it would be interesting and in some ways nice to be able to, have someone decide they want to do something with that and then have a chance to take that into account and say, okay, what does someone actually want to put on that corner?
I guess that was my question. Would a decision not to rezone that today, what kind of obstacle would that create towards the potential sale of that property in the future, which is what the landowner is expressing?
It makes it easier if you have someone interested in a B4 type lot. Obviously, it makes it easier if it's already zoned, right? They don't have to go through that contingency process of, I've got a site plan, I want to buy this. All of that's contingent on approval by the township. So I think the applicant, that's probably his thought process, gives them more options, right?
Be easier for a buyer because it's already been rezoned.
Already been rezoned.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have to.
Well,
they don't have to go through this
That's not
this
what
process.
he's looking at. He's looking at it's easier for him to sell. That's his intentions.
Well, I think if you look at the makeup of that corner, as the applicant and Mr. Gunning suggested, that's exactly where this is going.
I don't disagree.
So, but again, the hard part for me is it goes against their future land use map.
Right, that's where I
So
struggle.
it's it's like, okay, well, so I'd be interested from comments from other commissioners that were part of this discussion on maybe why this wasn't commercial or why it was zoned, I think was it rural buffer, and maybe not commercial, if we see this sort of ring road that was maybe coming down the pipe. But that's, I mean, I wasn't part of those discussions, so I'd be curious on anybody that was, if they could shed some light
I
on
think
that.
Alex kind of said it, and you may want to jump in, Alex, but, there was a lot of discussion here on this. And if I were to remember, maybe you have different thoughts on this, it was that there was going to be expansion of the road, right? That we saw that coming. But did that mean that it would be commercial or that it would be a thoroughfare? And I think that's where a lot of the discussion came. Because the prior master plan as well, also, a lot of this area over here is reserved for ag, R1, and so we were trying to not let that encroach there. At least those that fought for the green zone, rural
the
buffer.
buffer, yeah.
Right. But I think,
Okay.
as Alex pointed out, I think that was we had pretty deep discussions on this.
Quite a bit about it. And then the bridge was out at the time, so, we were all used to the tree canopy going up and down Lincoln, and it's beautiful and scenic, and, and I think I mentioned that with that bridge coming, that road will never look the same as it did. It was a safety issue. And I knew that, the ring road was established a long time ago, and I knew that's the route, and commercial follows where traffic is.
And so I agree with that, but I think we've got the cart in front of the horse, asking for a rezone without a specific client developer coming in and saying their intent for this property. And I'm looking at it from Alan and Carrie Bryant's viewpoint, because if you put in there anything that is permitted use, yeah, we probably can protect them with screening and hours of operation, lighting, and all that. But you, like Alex said, where the and everybody else said, where the traffic is, that's where you want to put service stations and all that. And if we make that B4, that's the first B4 on that corner, developers are going to be all over it, trying to get in that gas station on the corner and all that. Not that we don't have control on a special use permit, but I just think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves with rezoning without specifics. Rezoning just to attract developers, if they ever sell.
Commissioner Buckley.
I guess my concern is not so much with that corner, but immediately to the west. We zoned in the, there's a cutout in the parcel, that's what it's showing, but immediately to the west, that's rural preservation, is that correct?
This is rural preservation. It's currently zoned agricultural.
And the future land use is rural preservation.
That's correct.
So I guess I'm curious about, again, I agree, if we had an application in front of us and a site plan, we'd know what we were looking at. But that's buffer for a reason, because it's buffer next to rural preservation. If that goes B4 rather than some sort of light use, office space or such, then how far does our buffer go beyond that? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, I'm looking at the future growth boundary map, and as we look on page 12 and 13 of the master plan, is the growth boundary map goes a little ways down Broomfield, and I gotta assume that little gray square, I don't know how far that goes into Broomfield. About halfway up through Lincoln, it must be to the jump station.
Yeah,
I'm
I think it's
guessing.
those lots, right?
Okay, and then there's that little square to Lincoln Road now has become the rural buffer. But we could also see, if you look at the growth management, and it talks about it as a secondary growth area, is that, yes, it's still rural buffer, but as soon as that primary growth becomes, that we grow into that, then it's gonna keep growing towards Lincoln. I mean, the future land map, our master plan kind of gives us that direction, is that that's a secondary growth area. And so I see where they're coming from. What I'm hearing is, since we're going through this zoning ordinance change right now, is for us to then ask our consultants to look at that and say, well, maybe that is where that new zoning needs to be in connection with the future growth plan and so forth that we're seeing. So it doesn't have to necessarily say R2 in that area, but it may be premature for us to make that rezoning without the looking at really what we're going through with the new zoning map. So I would say it's a little premature with regards to that, and that we should really think about that and this ring road area as we go through that the zoning ordinance. So that would be my comment, and it might be premature in regards to rezoning that particular piece, even though it may end up being that way as we go through the next phase.
That's what Denise was referring to.
Yeah. That's what I was referring to.
Mhm.
That little, right there.
Other comments from commissioners? This will be a recommendation to the township board, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It would also be reviewed by the county planning commission.
As an action item?
As a required by ordinance, they review all of our text or map amendments.
Okay. Review in the sense of, like,
To give input. Typically, the only input we get is that they reviewed the application.
okay. Is that done before the Board of Trustees acts?
Yes.
After we, but before them?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So we can have further discussion. We can also have a motion, if anyone is so moved. I didn't actually recognize you.
I understand that. What happens if I pull my request? I don't want to do it. I lose the money, I understand that, but from what I'm hearing, you guys are about 5 years too early.
Or maybe 2. I mean, we haven't gone through the zoning ordinance. We're going through that process right now. We don't know the results of that action. In regards to the looking at the zoning and requirements and what it's going to be and what that map might look like, we don't know that part.
What I heard from you, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, is that as we redo our zoning, there may be something that may be more appropriate.
Yes.
That you might be able to back better than.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Well, so his question, is there anything to be gained by withdrawing a proposal versus letting it be acted on at this time? Couldn't he come back a year from now and make the same request, or no?
I believe there is, what is the rule?
As Peter looks at that, but at the same time is the new zoning map might be actually in favor of, and so he wouldn't have to come back.
Well, it wouldn't be a map, right? It's a zoning ordinance.
Yeah, but you get a.
So the
We're not gonna.
the rule is
irregardless, it would have to, there would have to be a rezone away from R2.
But could
Um,
not our next phase that we're going through, this could change?
Not the future land use, no.
This is not, this is the zoning.
That's just a
No,
zoning
that
map.
won't change without
We're not
actual
changing
rezonings.
What could potentially change would be the options, in other words, the
Right.
zoning categories.
Right, so
As we
we could do that.
As we update the zoning ordinance, one of the things that we could update, but it would require its own public hearing like is we could make changes to the zoning map. That is a part of the zoning ordinance that we'd look at. But at this time, there is no even discussion of any proposed changes to the zoning
Right.
map that the township has initiated.
We're not that far.
Yeah. The rule is, if we were to go through the entire process and the applicant not withdraw their application, it states whenever a proposed amendment or district change has not been adopted by the township board, the planning commission may refuse to hold another public hearing on same for all at least 1 year, unless it is conclusively proven that new conditions and circumstances exist. So it's not a shall, it's a may refuse for up to 1 year unless conditions or circumstances are new that did not exist before.
And if we vote on it, turn it down, no time limit?
No, this is if you go through the process, if we
Oh, I thought
continue
that
the
was-
application.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was if you pulled it.
If the township board ultimately chooses to not adopt the change, the planning commission may refuse to hold another public hearing for up to a year.
And the key word there being may.
May. And so for an example, you have rezonings, you also have conditional rezonings. A conditional rezoning is initiated by the applicant. We cannot put conditions on a rezoning. And so if the applicant were to come back and say, I would request a rezoning change from R2A to B4 on the condition that only uses A through D would be allowed, that would be, of course, a different circumstance, different condition,
Okay.
as an example.
So to summarize, if we vote and make a recommendation to the township board, which could be yes, it could be no, the trustees still make the determination. So even if the planning commission recommends no, board of trustees could say yes. But if the trustees say no, then the planning commission can refuse for up to a year to hear another request on the same issue unless the person can demonstrate that there's some major change in circumstances.
Yes, but I would just remind the applicant too that is here listening, the Board of Trustees does take your recommendation not lightly. And so although it's possible that the Board of Trustees may vote differently than the Planning Commission, it is very likely, and in the past, very likely that the recommendation the Planning Commission makes is the one that the Board of Trustees accepts. So it's not I don't want anybody to think it's a 50-50 kind of thing.
Mhm.
Typically, your recommendation is what the Board of Trustees accepts.
Okay, thank you. So,
So the next step from here is it would go, even if you turn it down, there goes to the board of trustees.
yeah, we make a recommendation, it still goes to the board of trustees.
So there's still a process that is going to go through no matter what happens here.
Yeah.
Unless you withdraw
Unless
it.
you withdraw.
So I got to wait a year. No matter what, I wait a year, so I might as well just go.
If you
through it.
withdraw, you could reapply next month.
Yeah.
It's a may require wait a year, not shall require. Which means
Meaning if we felt some conditions changed, like let's say you put a condition on the rezone, or you ask for office space instead of B4, for example, that would be a conditional change. You would be able to come back within that year. Does that make sense?
Basically, if you were to come and ask for the exact same rezoning next month, then they could refuse due to it being the same rezoning application.
But if you add a condition to that, then you could come back and we could consider it. Like what Commissioner Melky was saying. If you decide to put some restrictions on what type of B4, or what uses in that B4 that you're asking for. Or you could just withdraw it altogether, whichever you're most comfortable with.
through with the way it is right now, if it gets voted down, it goes to, the next, it's gonna go to the next step anyhow.
Yeah.
Let's stick with this one.
Okay.
Drive on that.
No, it's okay.
Okay, thank you. So, once again, it's before us. We can have a motion. If someone's ready to make one. Don't all jump in at once.
Could I just clarify one thing too?
Hmm.
I don't know that the applicant is necessarily concerned about this, but if that were to be rezoned B4, that would make it a non-conforming residential property. And that
Existing
would-
non-conforming.
Existing non-conforming, which would mean that its potential to be sold as a residence in the future. How does it work? Is that financing would then be a problem? So if, for instance, somebody came along and said, I want to buy your house.
Insurance?
As a non-conforming, does that mean, it seems like we've heard complaints of that in the past, that when they're
Yeah, I think
non-conforming.
insurance, right, is being
Is
able
it
to.
insurance or financing on a mortgage? That is
Well,
not-
We had an industrial property that they couldn't get proper insurance on their home, so they were asking it to be flipped back to residential.
Is that what it was, insurance? Okay.
And I'm not sure how the insurance agencies work, what they use. As far as our ordinance states, if I get a call from an appraisal, they ask if if it's burnt down, can it be replaced? And Section 9, replacement of non-conforming structures, residence and accessory building may be replaced that has been destroyed by reason of windstorm, fire, explosion, or any act of God or the public enemy. All construction codes shall be complied with. So even though that the residence is non-conforming, if it were to burn down, it could be replaced.
But it may not be insurable. I mean,
Yeah.
it may not be insurable. Okay.
I guess I remain to, after hearing discussion, remain to think that our planning, master plan shows one thing, and that this may be something that happens in the future, but again, premature. So I'll make a motion to recommend denial of rezone 2018-04 based on the fact that it's outside of our growth boundary, and our master plan identifies this as a rural buffer.
Second.
So the motion was by Milky, as stated, with a second by Cody. I think it's important that the minutes reflect the entire motion as stated because it includes our rationale. Did you get that? Okay. I guess it's on tape as well, but further discussion. So the motion is to recommend against. As we've indicated, it goes to the trustees. The trustees will consider it regardless. As Peter's pointed out, they give due weight to our recommendations. Any further discussion? So we'll do a voice vote and we'll see how that goes. All in favor of the motion to recommend against this particular rezone, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. I heard no votes, so it was the motion was approved without opposition. I don't know that it was unanimous, but it was approved without opposition. Okay. So we will move on. We have another rezone request. This is 2018-05. The address is 4080 South Whiteville Road. The request is to rezone from agricultural to R2A.
Mr. Chair, I need to see if the board believes there's a conflict of interest as I work for the developer.
Okay.
In the past, I have abstained.
Commissioner Fuller has reminded us that he's employed by the owner of the parcel that's making this particular request. Remind me, have you always not participated in actions that we've taken, or at least in recent years, involving this applicant? Okay. So I think, if I remember correctly, our procedure is to, for the rest of us to decide whether a perceived conflict of interest exists, in which case Commissioner Fuller will be excused from participating in this item.
Peter, do you have the conflict of interest bylaws there? Is employer a must recuse?
I don't believe it is.
Scenario?
I think we've gone on the fact that there could be some public perception.
Yeah.
Is what we've stated before.
And it would be recusal, not abstention.
Correct.
Recusal,
Yeah. And personally, I trust you to do the right thing, but I'm not sure it's wise to put you in that position either. That way it removes you from potentially getting...
I'm not sure where it is.
Removes this whole board from that.
Right, that's true. So it's probably wiser to. I think Alex always has done a great job as a planning commissioner, so don't take it as a slight.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't believe it is. I don't have the copy of them on me. I believe it's just related to family.
I don't have them in my old book. but
Everybody
I-
has their copy?
In the past.
But I thought it was, actually. I thought employer was
Work on potentially.
actually a must recuse.
Yeah. I'm not really worried about this, but perception. Did you lose Peter?
I think you just go to total bylaws. Oh, you have them? Yeah, that's in the bylaws, the recusal process. There's a may and there's a shall section.
Shall, it's a shall, declare a conflict of interest.
But does it mention an employer-employee
The
relationship?
commission member has a business or financial interest in the property involved in the request. The commissioner member owns or has a financial interest in neighboring property. There is a reasonable appearance of a conflict of interest as determined by the majority vote of the remaining members of the commission.
I think that's what we went on, is that there could be some. But it's not a commercial property. I own nothing there.
Well, okay, it says a commission member has a business or financial interest in the property involved in the request, or has a business or financial interest in the applicant's company, agency, or association.
I think that's what I was thinking of in terms of,
We didn't say
Business
or
interest.
employment, but do you
It just
have
may
a
be easier.
business or financial interest
I get a paycheck.
in the
But
applicant's
it's,
company,
but it's like you said, Alex, it's how
agency, or
public sees
association?
this.
Correct.
I think
That's written.
I'd have to agree with Alex that in the benefit of the public, take out all the guests.
Yep.
I think it's okay that Alex recuses himself.
I appreciate that Alex brings it to our attention each time as well.
Yes.
So you're gonna take notes, secretary?
What?
Okay, unless I hear objection, we'll accept Alex's decision or offer to recuse himself from this item. Okay, so we'll move forward. So again, this is a rezone request for 4080 South Whitefield Road from Ag to R2A. Peter's disappeared, so
I think he's still looking for the bylaws, and then we found him.
okay. I hope he's not looking too long. I want him to come back and introduce the topic. Okay. Thanks for getting those. Denise found hers, but
Okay. I'll be emailing everyone a copy.
Thanks.
we're ready to introduce the topic whenever you are.
Okay. So basically, we have a rezoning. We have a rezoning of parcel. It's currently zoned ag. The applicant has requested to rezone a portion, a northern portion, to R2A. This would match the existing there's a, if you look in your notice, you also have a in your packet a survey. There's a neighborhood, Meadowbrook. It is zoned R2A. The northern portion of the parcel, if rezoned, would match the R2A zoning of the neighborhood. The southern portion of the parcel, it would be split into two parcels. The southern portion would be remained ag. And in the picture up here, this is the parcel in question currently. This is all zoned agricultural. This is Whiteville Road. Broomfield turns into Whiteville Road when it curves down. This is Meadowbrook Drive. Currently, there is a single-family home on the parcel with an accessory building. This accessory building and the single-family home would remain on an ag parcel. This would be the dividing line as proposed. The parcel to the north would become R2A and match the zoning to the north of this neighborhood subdivision entering in on Meadowbrook. We sent a notice out to residents within 300 feet, published in the paper as required by law. So we will be having a public hearing, much like the rezoning before. We will be making a recommendation to the Board of Trustees. To briefly go over the memo that I put in, as with the first rezone, knowing that rezonings can at times be contentious, I gave you options on rezoning arguments for and against. For this one, this portion does actually reside in rural preservation. Rural preservation areas outside of the growth boundary should be maintained as low-intensity rural character of development that will not adversely impact natural features and agricultural uses. Agricultural should be promoted, and future rezoning requests for residential should be prohibited to prevent leapfrog development. Recommendations against: if applicant desires to build a one-family dwelling, this is already permitted in an ag district. The parcel is listed as rural preservation and located outside the growth management boundary. Recommendation 4: although located outside the growth management boundary, there is existing R2A abutting the property. As with ag and district, municipal sewer is not required in an R2A district. It would also not be considered leapfrog development, as it would abut existing R2A property. As always, I'm available for if you have any other questions, but I believe that would be a good summary heading into the public hearing portion.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have the public hearing. Once again, we'll give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission after the public hearing. So at this point, we'll open the public hearing. Any individual who'd like to address the Planning Commission on this request is invited to do so at this time. Give us your name and address for the minutes, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Address your comments to the Planning Commission. If there's anyone who would like to, and so public hearing's open at 8:58. If there's anyone who would like to address the Planning Commission on this request, they're welcome to do so at this time.
Doesn't the applicant go up first?
No, we normally let the applicant speak on their own, so.
Well,
looked at the survey, you noticed it was 50 feet, and that's incorrect at this point. Unless he gets a variance from the county, because that's still a right-of-way. So instead of 50 feet from the center of that right-of-way, you would have to go 50 feet from his property line.
Just the commission is aware of what the, Mr. Whitehead is saying. As of right now, and as you've noticed on the survey, this is an area designated to be vacated. If it is not vacated, the 50-foot setback would begin here. If it is vacated, you can begin the 50-foot setback from this line. But it is proposed, if rezoned, to be vacated. So this is why it's showing the 50-foot setback from this line and not this line.
I'm really not objection to a residential house there, that's fine. My biggest concern is doing a favor to the county, I sold the rectangle of that curve so they could put a driveway, make it more safe, and so the residents wouldn't run the stoplight getting on Broomfield Road. And I just want to maintain that as a county, part of the county. That's not going to affect that. But the center part, wherever he puts a driveway for this, assuming he's going to use the same drive that he's presently using for the residence itself. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Bill Whitehead, 1474.
Thank you. Other public comments? Going once? Going twice? Please.
Sir, I want to know this development of R2 that is back of our houses. My house is second on Stonehenge Drive. Second. Yeah. So where is this development? This corner?
Yeah. And so as noted before, in the survey, it is not an even line between the north and the south, that there's a bit of a zigzag. But there's an existing one-family, single-family home. There's an accessory structure. This is an older photo, so not all of these different accessory buildings exist. There is a accessory building located about around here. The northern half would be rezoned to R2A. The southern half would remain ag. That includes the existing single-family home and existing accessory building.
Now go a little up. You see, I'm not clear about this thing. Because the water in this area, we have 2 times the big flood in that area. And what will happen to that, you see, if in future they develop that, where that water will go?
Well, the request is to rezone it residential, so the development, if there were to occur development, would be most likely a single-family home, similar to what you have in your neighborhood. So
yeah, you see there on that corner, there is one building. Mr. Chuck built it there, and that was the low-lying area. The water was coming and you see stored there. And now he has lifted up too much that area because, and that water will get to our houses back there. So if those houses are on that corner, you see, that will be a problem because there will be more up there, and the water, where the water will go. They have to take care of that situation before anything happen in that area. Lot of water is coming from the field, from back there. coming this way to the corner of this Meadowbrook and Broomfield. That all water comes there. So if they were built there, they will be high too. Then that all water will go to our houses back there.
Peter, if there's a residential built there, I'm assuming if there's additional grading, there would have to be a grading permit to, is that accurate?
If you're doing a grading, you have to have a grading permit.
Right, that's right. So I'm assuming with the grading permit, they would be looking at water flow, right? Because, I mean, you can't purposely grade to dump water onto a neighbor, essentially, right? Is that accurate to state that Mr. Sarjeet
Yes, sir.
would be protected in that light?
If you're going to do any grading, you would need a grading permit. I know the county issues, no, we issue the grading permit. I'm thinking of a soil erosion permit. So yeah, you would have a grading permit from the township.
But that should assure Mr. Chowdhury that he's protected,
where water
correct?
is going, yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to give him some reassurance here that,
Yeah, so if the water is taken care of, that we have no problem. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comments? I don't think we've ever had a threefer before, but be our
I was
guest.
just thinking the same thing.
So do I have to still say my name and address for the record?
Yes.
So it doesn't matter how many times I come up here, it's irrelevant. 810 Ashland, Marty Fig. All right, that done. I just want to find out what's going on with this 50-foot thing. Do you know, Peter, what the deal is with that? When it's coming up? You said something about it.
It would be the setback requirement.
No, you said the county was asking or considering releasing that 50-foot easement.
Well, I would just remind everyone that it's not a back and forth. This is a public comment, and so after the public comment, either myself or the applicant, we can ask to answer these questions.
Well, I'm asking that to the planning commission then. When is this 50-foot easement going to be taking effect? What are the rules, or what are the details involved with that? I'm interested in finding out what, because that was a big comment I thought that Bill Whitehead made about the 50-foot setback. And it sounds like the 50-foot setback is a consideration, but not yet decided upon. That's what I'm trying to ask about, is what is going on with the 50-foot setback, and I'd like to see if the planning commissioners could dig a little deeper into that. And what the road is actually going to be doing, is it that area, or is it what, because that road extends to the north with that easement. Okay, is it all part of that, or is it just that one area? That's what I'm looking at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comments?
There's also still a public comment at the end, right?
Extended, yes.
Just
The fourth opportunity, yes, there is. Other comments during the public hearing for this request? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing, thank the public for their comments. So this is back before us. Unless Peter has anything to add at this time, I'll give the applicant or the applicant's representative an opportunity to address us and stand for questions. You good with that?
Yep.
Okay.
Good evening. My name's Tim Beebe. I'm with Central Michigan Surveying Development, 510 West Pickard. Soon to be out in the township. We should open our office probably the first week in November. So if somebody's looking for us, we're going to be right across from Ben Gunning. What's turned into you is a rezone of property The property goes to the section line, so therefore, that's the legal description that was turned in for the rezone. The 50-foot, we'll do that so that we can address some of the public comments. It's not a 50-foot easement, it's a 50-foot setback. Typically, we show on these drawings where the setbacks would be. The road commission is in the process of vacating that section of roadway. That is something that the road commission does, not the township. It's actually so that's something that the road commission is doing. What I showed was and that's why I put the note on there, if they abandon the right-of-way as they have said that they're going to do, then the setback would be from our property line, not from a right-of-way line. So typically, when we turn in, we're asked to show any known future right-of-ways. In this case, it goes backwards. Normally, it's an expansion of right-of-way, and you're showing your setbacks from that. This happens to be a withdrawal. But it's one of the requirements that we show it based on what we know to be coming. That's why it's shown the way it is. Today, it comes from the road right-of-way because it is not vacated. But the road commission's in the process of vacating it, so that's why it's shown the way it is. What we're looking at doing is rezoning a piece of property from ag to an R2A. They are both a residential type property. There are more restrictions of what you can do in the R2A than there is in the ag. Accessory buildings, things of that sort. What we're looking at doing is trying to conform to the properties immediately to the north. The driveway would actually be coming off from Meadowbrook and would look as part of that development. So that's what we're here trying to do is get it rezoned so that a residential, it can be used as a residential property now, granted, but it's actually more restrictive if it goes to an R2A. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything that I can.
Is the motivation that it'll be a more attractive or more sellable piece of property if it's rezoned, or?
And it joins in with the subdivision and meets in with that look, and that instead of it being an agricultural parcel, which this is going to be kind of the buffer. Mm-hmm. You've got the old farmhouse and the large barn. This is the buffer between the subdivision, but we're trying to get it so that it looks more like what's in the subdivision than out.
Mm-hmm.
So
why not R1 then in that case?
Well, the R2A is what we're immediately adjacent to.
Okay, just curious.
Actually, Peter and I had that discussion of what zone, and R2A was the most appropriate.
Yeah, the real difference between the two is setbacks, and then the R2A can do 2-family unit versus 1.
Yeah.
That's.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if setback was part of that, or because with the ag, that's the other difference between the ag and the R2A. Then would be your setbacks.
Is your setbacks? It's more accommodable for a residential home. The setbacks, absolutely, but to give you an example, the large accessory structure isn't allowed.
Right, it's not conforming for residential, right? Hence not rezoning that.
Yeah, well, you can't. It'd be
Right.
Right, it could, but it's
right, it'd be non-conforming.
Right off the bat. But
I'm going to put you on the spot just because
Sure.
the issue was raised, and I'm kind of curious. What is your opinion? Are there drainage issues?
there are lots of drainage issues out there,
Okay.
but it's not that lot that's causing it. There's a farm field that's dishing all kinds of water down into that woods. I was out there last year's flood, and we blew the tube out in the driveway up there, and there was all kinds of problems. The water's all coming from the farm fields. It came down so hard, so fast, and the slope of the terrain out there it's not a flat farm field. It runs off quickly. It comes down into that woods. That woods had all kinds of water in it. I was at the house on the corner. In fact, we did a bunch of work for the fella there, right, his neighbor to the east.
Yeah, no.
Nope.
First house on
First
the left.
house,
when you
right
come on
there.
that- Yeah, right there. You got it.
We did a bunch of work on that, trying to help him not flood again. So there is a lot of drainage problems, but there's a ditch line that comes along the northern edge of this property and takes the water out. It's just a matter of how much water is coming. And there's a rear lot drainage all the way along that subdivision. But for the amount of water that's coming at it from off-site,
Yeah, that ditch isn't
So
real
you're-
big.
it's,
What you're basically saying is that the water's coming from somewhere out here, and that what's taking place on this parcel is having
little to no
extensions.
effect.
I think this is a serious problem to the east as well, because
Well,
that
I don't know if you went back in that subdivision, but it
Yeah.
looked like the mudslides that you see out in California. It was amazing the amount of water. that came through
Sinkholes.
it.
from, you're talking about in
It was-
June of 17?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I spent, the next, I was out here at, I don't know what time in the morning, but I was bouncing all over the county because we had drainage issues everywhere. That type of storm, you're gonna see that, but they see water and they have water issues even without that large of a storm. So there's a number of, and the Drain Commission has looked at it, and the county engineer has looked at it, and so.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Beebe?
I'm going to ask again, I guess, just for clarification. I was trying to figure out motivation for the rezone. So is it, I'm just going to, if it were me, it's going to be that setback, right? I mean, is that kind of the driving?
It's one of the things is setback.
Okay.
But to try and join into the subdivision to the north,
You actually, so that's the desire, is to actually bring that into the subdivision. Okay. When you were alluding to that before, I didn't know if that was just
well,
as a neighbor or being part of that.
no, you're not going to be part of, but because those lots that are along Stone Ridge Drive are meets and bounds lots. There were restrictions that were put on those. I did that development. There were deed restrictions on those. Now, when you get into Stonecrest back to the west, those were actually in part of the plat, in the recorded plat. But those had deed restrictions on. There's an architectural committee that you have to turn it over to, but that was written on those properties. So we can't just automatically join in and say, hey, we're part of the party.
Right.
So.
But you can look like it.
But I can look like it.
But you don't have to rezone to be able to look like it.
If you want, part of the effort is to make sure that the neighbors understand that what developed to the south can't happen to the north.
Understood.
I don't know if I said that delicately enough, but.
I got it.
Clear, okay.
Yes. Trying to be a good neighbor.
There you go.
Send a message. Thank you.
Others? Once again, it's a recommendation to the Township Board. We can have a motion if anyone's ready, or we can have further discussion. Or other questions.
Well, I mean, I live in this neighborhood, but I'm not within the 300 feet. I think it would be a great addition. It would blend well with the neighborhood. The applicant is proposing the drive, sounds like off of Meadowbrook. And it would appear that it would fit with the neighborhood, even though it wouldn't have the same restrictions. So, you know, I would make a motion to approve, you know, rezone 2018-05 from agriculture to R2A.
Second.
Okay, so the motion was by LaBelle to recommend to the Township Board that they approve rezone request 2018-05 from agricultural to R2A, and the second was by Cody. And we have no restrictions to apply to this, it sounds like. So, further discussion.
Just for, and you'd think you have one over here, but with rezonings, we just have to state the reasoning, and so the reasoning would be that it matches the neighborhood to the north, or?
Yeah, it blends in well with the abutting property to the north.
Okay, stated reason. Brian?
So when I first looked at this, I have to say this, I guess. With regards to previous rezoning that we had here, I looked at the master plan. And so where I struggled with this is the master plan, as far as future land use, doesn't really encourage this, but I'm supportive of it because it is abutting and it does fit with the nature of it, even though this does counter our master plan. You know, so I struggle whenever we go against the master plan, right? And so I'm trying to say that I feel there's proper rationale to be able to do that in this case.
Yeah, that whole southwest corner of the township is designated rural preservation, but on the other hand, this is one little blip
Lot
of it that's
attached to-
touching
right.
the residential, so.
But I wanted, because of the previous rezone,
Yeah, mhm.
that I used the argument of the master plan. I want to make clear that I also took the master plan into account here.
Absolutely.
Well, I think the master plan should guide us as well. I think the fact that it's the northern parcels it would conform to the same zoning as those. I think also you have to take into consideration what's immediately to the south, and I think that's going to remain zoned as is for a good long time. So I don't have much concern about leapfrogging or anything like that. So yeah, I would agree.
And just a note that when you read the rural preservation, it states that future rezoning requests for residential should be prohibited to prevent leapfrog development, but in this case, we're not doing leapfrog development.
Okay, other comments? Ready to vote? So the motion is to recommend approval of this rezone. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried without objection.
Okay, Peter, will this go to which township board meeting? Or does it go to the county first?
It goes to the county first, so it'll probably be sometime in November.
So, will you notify me?
Yep.
I've got a grandbaby due in November, so I'm,
Okay.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Number 2. Yes, sir.
Okay, we have one more agenda item. I am gathering that we have an expiring term on the Sidewalks and Pathways Committee. And we have an application. This is a current member, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Is this the only application for the position at currently, or?
Yes.
Okay. So, and he's seeking appointment for a 2-year term, 1-year term?
I believe. I believe it's a 2-year term.
Commissioner Cody? I'm sorry?
I apologize. I really have to go at this time.
Okay, we'll still have a quorum, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
I believe it is in the packet. You have the boards.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I believe it is a 2-year term.
Yes. I have that right. Yeah, it's listed under, well, he's currently in a 2-year term.
Yep.
Talk about waiting till the last minute.
'Cause I
Till
know
tomorrow.
There are a couple of the positions I believe are 1-year terms that then become 2-year terms, so that they're staggered.
Okay.
But they all are 2-year terms once the initial 1 year is done.
Okay. And
2020?
That's correct.
okay, well,
Need a motion to approve?
I think so. Yeah.
Move to appoint Jerry McDonald to the Sidewalk and Pathways Committee.
Support.
For, through a 2-year term until October 2020.
Support.
Okay, so the motion was by Webster to appoint Jeremy McDonald, to reappoint, but appoint to the Sidewalks and Pathways Committee, and the second was by Shingles. I assume since you made that motion, you're satisfied with him as I mean, you feel like he's doing a good job and all that? He's there, he's okay. All right.
He's a warm body.
Okay. So, any further discussion? Motion is to appoint him. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So he will continue. Other business, is there any other business that needs to come before us tonight? Hearing none, we'll move to extended public comment. This is the portion of the meeting where individuals may address the planning commission on any item, whether it was on tonight's agenda or not. In the interest of time, we'll just ask people to keep their comments as brief as possible, but extended public comment is open at 9:27.
Can't be outdone by Marty. Bill Whitehead, 1474 East Broomfield Road. Pete, could you call up, or can you call up? That's an old term for an old guy like me. Would you go to the water, wetlands map on that? You should have it. County has it. Would it be under PA 116, or you got it? Any case, that woods behind Mr. McGurk that belongs to Bob Ball, which I farmed that. That's considered a wetland. There's water there. Middle of August, there's water there. When we used to farm that, there are several streams or brooks or underground water in that whole area. Now, how they ever built those houses there in the first place is beyond me, but that's the same problem on Green Acres as well. Just to mention the fact that the barn or structure, if you'd like to call it a barn, it's more than a barn. It's not. It's a pretty big structure. There's a lot of water comes off that building, and that most of that water goes into that wetland or the wooded area. But the amount of grade they put in there, it's like 6 foot higher than, let's put it, Stan Veit's house. It had 5 steps going to the house. It's now 2 steps. And that's all from that when they did the road. So what I'm trying to say is that there's gonna be a lot of water coming off that area. And, I know it's residential, and I'm assuming R2 is gonna be restriction to just one residence, not a multi-residence, correct?
It can be one or two family
One or
unit.
two. So you could do a duplex there. And if I knew that, I would say I went against a duplex, because that's not going to match the northern part of that.
The existing, but the neighborhood to the or a duplex is allowed in R2A. So the neighborhood to the north, unless there is some kind of deed restriction where you cannot have a duplex in that neighborhood, R2A says you can.
Correct.
There's currently two at the moment.
There's
Right
two in there already?
Yeah,
Right there.
Oh, I did not realize that, so.
It's, it'd be probably the second and third property in.
Along the
On the
golf
east
course.
Along the golf course, on the right side of Meadowbrook, that's the second
see.
and third property in are both duplexes.
Okay, well, and that's what it is. You can't find the waterway in that, wetlands? You got the floodplain. I know it's there in someplace.
Oh, you got it, right?
This is the FEMA flood hazard.
Right. It should give you highly erodible soil. It should give you wetlands. But
Is it down below there, there's some soil, keep going down.
What is Sergio soils?
Soil.
yeah. Well, anyway, when this body looks at a piece of property rezoning, you probably ought to look at wetlands as well and highly erodible soils, not just at the land itself, because there's quite a bit of difference there.
Did you say something about PA 116?
Well, PA 116 just is restriction of ag.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have to pay for your sidewalks and your sewage going through our property, which is a great thing for the
Yeah.
government to put in there. Okay, well, I guess that's all.
All right, thank you.
As mentioned, you see, we had a problem on water in that area.
Hmm?
Lot of water from agriculture is coming, and that is shooting. Well, my house is on the second there. Last year we have a big flood, you see, 3-4 feet in the basement. When there was a last year, I think, yeah.
Hmm?
And till they take care of that part, it should not be there, the apartments. Yeah, Mr. McGurk, he has already raised that his property 6-8 feet high from the properties we do have. He has dumped a lot of dirt there when he built this his barn there or whatever you call him. And that was taking the water before, you see, all that water was holding in that area, then moving towards the golf course. But now that water straight comes to our houses. There's no way you can stop it. And I have a $1 million home there. So it is my concern until they look into the water part, how they are going to handle that part. I think that should not be approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comments?
I won't even take the chair this time, but I will say, Marty Fig, 810 Ashland. I want to thank Jennifer for her sterling efforts in these extended type meetings. And with that, say goodnight and thank you all for your public service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So extended public comments closed at 9:34. Final board comments. Any comments from commissioners? Brian?
Peter, I'd just like to thank you for in the packet regarding the rezones, providing information for or against rather than a recommendation. Yeah, I thought that was very helpful, and thank you.
Yep, agreed.
And I'm assuming, would you take the same approach on SUPs since they're kind of judgmental? I figured this one you didn't because it was from the previous packet, and maybe weren't doing that then?
Yeah, I mean, I can consider it. Sometimes, I guess it's I'll say how it works for the rezonings. Sometimes they're easier for me to give an argument on both sides.
Not always, though, right?
Yeah.
Argument with yourself in your office?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
Well, in any event,
I can
it
look
helped.
at
I
to
didn't
see,
feel like I was in a box, and we were
Yeah.
able to deliberate. And
Yeah, when possible, I can offer arguments on both sides for our issues.
I have a comment on Mr. Falsetta's rezoning. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about neighbors' property values, but what protects his property value? He has not requested this interchange, he has not requested these roadways, and so there's no avenue, or there is no protection for him. That's just what I got to say.
that's the struggle.
Yeah.
You're right, though.
The community wants the roads, the community needs the roads. He just happens to live there.
But I think, once we go through in this ordinance, hopefully that's gonna address maybe some of his issues, that we can do something with that and address the land use map at the same time. I mean, because it would make sense to have something like that there, and that not be residential.
And my point was, I think the cart's before the horses. I am not against commercial or business. Once the road gets in there and we have developers starting to look at that property, I don't think it's gonna be hard for us to rezone along that stretch. At that point, though, protecting the neighbors behind them, right? Not their property value, but protecting the neighbors behind them like we always do. So,
We may have more latitude at that point to additional screening, those types of things.
well, my thought was, we do that, we're gonna have everybody along that stretch coming in, and we're gonna get bombarded. Not that it's not the right thing for them personally to do, and I'd be protecting myself, but I still would like to see the developers coming in and approaching us with, now that it's a 5-lane road, got the traffic, this is a great spot for this zone. And then let us hash out that zone.
What I'd like to go is, if our master plan is a living document, then when the roads do, in fact, if that ring road comes in and so forth, that we should revisit our growth map and the future land map, because that road will, and so it is what it is now, but it may not be in the very future, and if this is supposed to be a living document, then we should revisit those. As a comment. Also with that, I would hope that during our zoning ordinance, our consultants are looking at our criteria for special use permits, because those 10 criteria really don't help us. So I'd like to make known that I would hope that they would be looking at that very strongly.
Yeah, I think the first 2 or 3 are useful, but then it's
Yeah.
just
And from that point on.
right.
Then everybody gets a smile on their face.
Right, like, oh, this one again.
I think Phil just likes taking us through that exercise.
Right.
It amuses everybody.
To see if we're paying
Warms up.
attention.
Just wait, one of these times we'll require a surety bond and we'll feel like we've done our job.
Just more of a question in regards to Mr. Chowdhury and his concerns on the water. Is there anything that, a resident can do? Because there is a lot of water coming from a neighboring property. Some of the McGurk property that we just rezoned, but a lot of it's coming from that farmland from the Ball family.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that I was going to say was that I think that he's got a legitimate concern. I mean, I live in a subdivision further to the east, and, when I bought that place almost 30 years ago, I looked and went back and saw that I was a good 20 feet above the river, and I thought, gee, I don't have anything to worry about. And for most of that time, I haven't. But, when we keep getting, 3, 4, 6 inches of rain at a time, I think a lot of things change. And so the county is going to have to look at drainage in a big sort of way.
But at one point, before that neighborhood was developed, there was natural drainage to the river. And so, did we cut off with the development the natural drainage to the river? And they didn't put anything, or something's in place and it's plugged. I don't know that area. I know my area where I'm at, and I know where the natural drainage is and how it gets to the river. But I'm assuming in that area.
That is what rain does. It goes from the higher elevations and it seeks the rivers.
Yes.
Well, in this particular corner, there is drainage to the river. But again, it wasn't sufficient. The county, one of the neighbors 2 houses over from me lost his whole driveway.
Yeah,
it was gone,
something.
completely gone. And I
And
had
10 feet down.
Half my backyard was full of sand from all that stuff that had washed down.
So the Drainage Commission identified that the culvert to get to the river's not big enough?
That's above my pay grade. So I believe they did put in a whole new culvert there, as well as is up, kind of in those couple areas where those houses are on the entry. One were the McGurk property that we just rezoned, and then the first house on the left, but not on Stone Ridge, the one that you said, hey, you'd asked me if I lived there. I was like, no, that's not me. That's Keith Cotter. So they put a drain basin in there as well.
So it's getting to a pipe to get to the river.
Yes, and then it goes down and then feeds out, then goes under the road, under Meadowbrook, and then down through, between Riverwood property and my property, right down to the river. So, and that was completely washed out. I mean, it really needs the ditch needs to be redone because it's not really a ditch anymore. I mean, the ditch is probably about this deep when it was about this deep. So there's just all that sand that's in there now. But I just didn't know if there's anything for a resident to do to address a neighboring property owner's drainage coming down there. There probably isn't.
Only if they change the grade of their property to drain onto the neighbor's property.
It was changed dramatically.
For this rezone or this?
No, last year.
I'm saying
just before the flood.
For the parcel immediately.
So if somebody's building if somebody's building a great piece of property right next to you, and they build it up so high that their property and everything on it is draining onto your property, that's an issue. That's not allowed, right? It's illegal, legally not allowed. But if they drain to a common ditch or existing grade to get to a drain, that's allowed.
And there is one there. It's just not much of a ditch.
Well, I don't think it can handle what we had in June of last year,
yeah,
which
absolutely.
Nothing would have.
Right.
I mean, so I mean, for everyday use, it handles. I think it handles it fine. But when you get something like that, or even something half of that, I mean, his house. I didn't see it, but the neighboring property right on the corner of Mr. Schlick. I mean, he had 3.5 feet of water in his basement.
That, to me, I'd be going to the
Drain Commissioner.
I went there, sir.
I would just want to note that it's a final board member comment, and so that we're just supposed to be making final board comments, not
There was a lot
conversation.
of people in the county that had 3 feet of water.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
Thank
it
you.
is a larger issue. Any other board comments? If not, then we've completed our agenda, so we stand in adjournment till November. Thank you very much.
So now I'm curious. You wouldn't talk to the Drain Commissioner? You talked to the Drain Commissioner?
Yeah.
Okay.
He said they cannot do nothing. They said you have to get the signs from your property and then all those people.
That's Thanksgiving week.
But a Drain Commissioner can begin that process.